My name is Tessa Whitaker, and 5 minutes after my sister posted that showroom photo, I finally did the one thing my family had spent years daring me to do. Aubrey stood beside a new Tesla in downtown Chicago, smiling like success belonged to her, while my parents filled the comments with praise sharp enough to leave marks. They called her generous, called me cold, and by the time I reached the last line, I understood they were celebrating a gift bought with money she never earned. Beside my laptop sat the note Reed had left after midnight, printed in hard block letters across a yellow square. If she posts the car, freeze the cards first. I read it once, then looked back at Aubrey's picture, at the polished hood, her lifted chin, the dealership glass behind her, and felt something inside me go still. Jonah leaned in, read my parents' comments over my shoulder, and gave me the only sentence that mattered anymore. It is time you cut everything off. I opened the expense platform tied to the reserve account I still controlled under the agreement Aubrey had signed when she needed my money to keep breathing. I revoked every active company card linked to that balance, watched each authorization vanish from the screen, and felt calm arrive with a force anger never had. Then I picked up my phone, called Marlo, and while Aubrey was probably still posing under dealership lights, I told our lawyer to file the emergency papers. 4 years earlier, Aubrey showed up at my door in Naperville with mascara dried under her eyes and a leather portfolio stuffed with overdue invoices, payroll warnings, and vendor demands. Her staging studio had expanded too fast. The warehouse lease was crushing her, and she stood in my kitchen admitting that another month like that would finish her. I looked at the papers spread across my counter. I heard her whisper, "I just need one chance," and understood she had come to me because every bank had refused. I pulled $3 million out of investments Jonah and I had built carefully over years. And even then, he refused to let Pity walk in without paperwork. He read every line before Aubrey signed, and the terms were plain enough to survive any family argument: full records, spending limits, audit rights, and remedies if she crossed them. She barely slowed down, turning pages with shaking hands and promising, "This is until I get stable," while Jonah kept his finger on the signature line until the ink dried. The money worked exactly the way rescue money is supposed to work, clearing balances, holding her staff in place, and buying her enough time to land higher-paying clients. Within a year, she had steadier accounts, better projects, and a new voice whenever she described the business. Like survival had become proof she had done it alone. I heard that change first in the way she thanked me less each month, until gratitude disappeared and my money became the part of her story she intended to erase. Once Aubrey stabilized the studio, she started appearing in local real estate blogs and polished Instagram posts as if struggle had been hers alone. Every caption praised grit, taste, and vision, and every interview trimmed away the one fact that made the whole comeback possible: my money. I would finish reading, set my phone down, and feel the same pressure behind my ribs, because erasure arrives softly before anyone names it. When I brought it up over dinner, Aubrey did not deny anything. She only smiled and told me investors made founders look dependent. She called the omission branding. Like deleting the person who kept your lights on was no different from choosing a cleaner image online. Jonah sat beside me, listening, said almost nothing, and left the restaurant with that narrowed look he gets when numbers stop matching up. My parents loved her rewritten version because it sounded expensive, and expensive had become their favorite proof that a life was working out. Every rooftop photo, every launch party, every staged apartment reached them like confirmation that Aubrey was the daughter who knew how to rise. Patricia filled her comments with hearts and pride, while Daniel wrote lines about hustle and vision, as if applause could turn fiction into truth. I kept waiting for them to ask where the money came from, but admiration made them careless and convenience bought their loyalty. By then, I understood the lie was not hers alone. It was a family story, and my silence was the part they needed. She kept posting. They kept praising. And each polished version of her success made one thing clearer to me: gratitude had already been replaced. Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house had already gone cold by the time Aubrey arrived. Carrying glossy shopping bags and that bright, practiced smile she wore whenever she needed witnesses. She breezed past the waiting food, kissed Patricia, squeezed Daniel's shoulder, and launched into stories about luxury listings, premium clients, and flights she booked without checking prices anymore. Jonah stayed quiet beside me while Aubrey kept performing, and I watched my parents laugh too hard at every line, as if applause could make her version permanent. Then Aubrey turned toward me with that softened voice people use before cruelty, smiled over her wineglass, and asked how long I planned to keep thinking small. She said some people were built to grow and others were built to watch. And Patricia actually laughed before adding that ambition had never been my strongest trait. I set down my fork, looked straight at Aubrey, and reminded the table that her business was still standing on the $3 million I had put in. The room changed instantly, not because anyone doubted me, but because I had broken the agreement everyone else seemed to share, which was letting Aubrey keep lying comfortably. Daniel hit the table with his palm and told me Thanksgiving was no place for bitterness, while Patricia called me jealous and accused me of resenting success. Jonah stood, crossed behind my chair, laid my coat over my shoulders, and murmured, "We're leaving now, because you do not owe these people another minute of this." 2 months after Thanksgiving, Jonah began his routine review of Aubrey's quarterly reports. And the first thing he noticed was not one large theft, but clusters of careful little lies. The ledger kept repeating the same pattern: polished vendor names, harmless invoice amounts, and payment dates staggered just enough to look ordinary unless someone patient sat down and followed them. Jonah spread the statements across our dining table, tapped 3 nearly identical charges with one finger, and told me this does not read like sloppy spending at all here. That night, I called Reed Lawson, the only forensic fraud investigator I trusted enough to bring into my home, and he arrived carrying a laptop, coffee, and restraint with him. He did not start with theories or outrage, only routing numbers, addresses, invoice histories, and the quiet patience of someone who knew false paperwork always repeats itself in the end. By the weekend, Reed had matched the vendors to mailbox addresses, linked the transfers to accounts Aubrey controlled, and circled the obvious conclusion without softening it for me tonight either. The charges were never random. They paid for clothes, travel, private dinners, and little rehearsals of wealth that let Aubrey keep performing success in public for strangers to admire her. Then Reed found the transfer chain that mattered most: a separate fund feeding the Tesla purchase, built from the same money she had sworn to protect for my sake alone. I stared at that page longer than the others, because it was not just theft anymore. It was my parents being bought with my own rescue money right in front. Reed slid the timeline toward me, each date pinned to a payment, each payment tied to a shell, and told me now you stop guessing and start reading facts clearly. We backed up every invoice, every approval trail, every transfer receipt, and every account screenshot until our dining room felt less like home than evidence stacked on top of itself there. By the time we finished, the ugliest part was no longer wondering whether Aubrey had stolen from me, but knowing exactly how she had turned family into leverage for status. The call came on a Sunday evening while Jonah and I were still sitting with Reed's timeline spread across the table between 2 untouched mugs of coffee. Patricia did not ask how I was. She opened with the Tesla, the shortfall, and the expectation that I would transfer the rest by morning. She called it family help, then called me difficult, and every word landed beside the audit pages, proving exactly what kind of family help they meant. Before I could answer, Aubrey took the phone and spoke with that bright, impatient confidence she used whenever she mistook access for ownership. She told me the studio cash flow was hers to direct, hers to spend, and mine to stop questioning if I knew what was good for me. Jonah lifted his phone without a word, started the recording app, and set it near the speaker while I let Aubrey keep talking. That was the part she never understood about arrogance. Once it feels safe enough, it stops hiding and begins volunteering the truth in complete sentences. She said she controlled the money now, that the business answered to her, and that no one was going to tell her how to use it. I barely spoke, because silence was suddenly more useful than outrage. And the more room I gave her, the more she confessed. When the call ended, Jonah emailed the audio to Marlo with Reed's audit summary, the traced transfers, and the contract clauses Aubrey had just violated. Marlo reviewed everything that night and came back with the only answer that fit the evidence: default notice, preservation demand, and emergency papers at first light. By then, the confession was no longer a fear sitting in my chest. It was a file on our screen, time-stamped, saved, and ready there. The next morning, Aubrey's Tesla photo hit my feed just after 8, all chrome and glass and triumph, with Patricia and Daniel praising her like proud investors. I looked at the picture, then at Reed's yellow note beside my laptop, and followed the order exactly. Freeze the cards first. Call Marlo second. Perfectly. By the time the emergency filing was moving and every active card tied to my reserve account went dark, Aubrey was probably still smiling for strangers. Later, I learned how she walked through that downtown Chicago showroom with Patricia and Daniel beside her, carrying herself like the whole building had been arranged for them. She handed over the company card with the same ease she used casually online, as if confidence could cover every gap between performance and reality. The machine answered before anyone else could. A short error tone, a pause at the terminal, and then the first clean refusal she had faced in years. Aubrey asked them to run it again, already annoyed, already blaming equipment, while Patricia stood frozen and Daniel tried to step back from the counter. When the second attempt failed, the sales associate lowered his voice only a little and told her there were insufficient funds to complete the purchase. That was the moment the room changed. Because a public decline does not create humiliation from nothing. It only reveals what was already false. I never needed to stand in that showroom to see it, since the sequence was already quietly sitting in my inbox through timestamps, notifications, and silence. The cards had been revoked. The filing had been sent. And the story Aubrey sold my parents for years had just been declined with them. What failed at that counter was not a payment, but the fantasy that stolen money could keep buying applause once the person underwriting the lie finally stopped. By 2 that afternoon, Aubrey was pounding on my front door with Patricia and Daniel behind her, all three carrying the raw panic of people who had finally met a boundary. Jonah opened the door, stepped into the room before they could take it over, and told them they could lower their voices or leave immediately. Aubrey pushed past that warning anyway, demanded to know what game I was playing with her accounts, and stopped only when I placed the binder on the table between us. I laid out the audit, the transfer trail, the contract pages, and the flash drive with her Sunday confession, then told her to start reading wherever she liked. Aubrey flipped through the tabs, lost color line by line, and by the time Patricia leaned in, even she could see the car fund sitting inside the same stolen chain. Daniel kept looking from the pages to me as if there were still a version of this where authority could outrun proof. But the numbers had already closed that door. 6 months later, the studio was gone. The case had ended in liquidation and repayment, and the expensive life Aubrey rented around herself had been stripped back to what it really was. Patricia and Daniel lost the softness that borrowed money had given them, sold off what they could, and showed up at my house one rainy afternoon asking for grace they had never once offered me. I listened long enough to hear what they were really mourning, and when I understood it was not their daughter but their access, I closed the door and kept it closed. Thank you for staying with me through this story, and through the moment I finally chose peace over access. Silence. And the kind of love that always came with a bill. If any part of it stayed with you, let me know. I hope you find gentler rooms, steadier love, and a life that feels honest.